It says we're live. I think we're live, and I don't expect to have any boomer moments tonight. I rebooted the computer so that we should not have a repeat of the problem I had yesterday, which you may hear some noise upstairs because we have misbehaving children. Good evening, everybody. Let's see, we got a B in the house now as opposed to the F to let me know that everything's good. All right, people. So tonight, it's a double header for live streams. Yesterday, I went live with, no, it wasn't yesterday. It was Monday. John Carpe from the JCCF. We had an amazing discussion. Alison Morrow is this week's Sidebar with Viva and Barnes. And for those of you who don't know Alison, I mean, you should know Alison because she's got a great channel, is one reason. Second reason, she's on Eric Hunley, and we've done a few streams there as well. And they have some lively streams, but fascinating person, a great personality, and everyone's going to get to know that. Former reporter, I mean, I guess still not former reporter, but former producer at Fox, a decade, I think, over a decade in journalism at an organization before she left and started on her own. And she's got a great story. We're going to be doing this with Barnes, who is pulling the LA time in terms of arrival. What else? I don't think I need to give the standard disclaimers. I may be able to get to all of the super chats. If I don't, and you're going to be miffed if I don't get to the super chat, don't give them. What else? No legal advice. There was a third one that I typically do. Oh, yes, I have not put on slow mode. So do not abuse of the fact that it's not on slow mode, and I won't have to put it on. I think I will be able to keep up with the chat and take the questions. And let me see here. Okay, what else was there? Oh, goodness. Anyhow, this is going to be an amazing discussion. Just in time, by the way, for I ordered my own merch from Represent because I wanted to get this shirt just in time to have a discussion about the media with someone who knows it more intimately than anyone who's been on my channel ever, and someone who knows it more intimately than pretty much anybody out there, because there's only so much you can know about the workings of the media. So we're going to, anybody has any questions, bring them in there, and we'll get to them in due time. And I think that is about enough time to let the crowd slowly trickle in. YouTube has not been particularly good on the notification. Looking good, sounding good. Good. What do we got? F, yes, ha, the actual. And everyone, don't forget to hit the like button. Don't worry about that. I'll remind you late. Okay. Slow mode's off. Don't do it. Don't do it, BLT. Okay, people, let's do this. Damn, my mom is calling. I have to go home. Okay, let us bring in Alison. Everybody's seen the way I do live streams with a first-time individual on the channel. I want to get to know Alison, and I have, the standard history to get to know who the person is, so we can understand the present by understanding the past. So without further ado, Alison, you are in the stream live. How are you doing?
It's an honor. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
First of all, it's about time. It's my pleasure, and it's going to be phenomenal. We've done a few streams together on Eric Hunley's channel. Everybody knows Eric Hunley, on Locals as well. And by the way, actually, before I even forget, you're on Locals as well.
Yes, and Eric and I are actually going to be doing our weekly News with Booze after this live stream on Eric's channel. So if you aren't sick of me by the end of this, you can get more with alcohol on Eric's channel.
The News with Booze, by the way, it's a great concept. I would think I came in on it once after the fact, where I wasn't actually, I had my martini of the evening, but I was not actively drinking on screen because
what kind of martini do you prefer?
Gin out of the freezer, which I'm told is what swine do, but we have a bottle of gin in the freezer.
Okay.
The gin market in Quebec, I don't know if it's the same in the States, has been saturated with micro distilleries, artisanal gins, and it's an amazing thing. You can, never have the same one twice. Okay, Alison, let's start from the beginning. First of all, tell everybody who you are, and then I'm going to get into some questions.
Okay, well, I'm Alison Morrow. I'll start a few years ago. I got into television news right out of college. I basically worked my entire college years doing internships in news as a producer. I always said I didn't want to be on TV. And I noticed that if you started your internship and you said, I'm here because I want to be on television, that you would only be getting coffee and doing all the terrible tasks for the big wigs. But if you went in and you said you wanted to be a producer, that you liked working behind the scenes, you were there for journalism, that they would let you do all kinds of cool things. So they would put me on TV. I get to be on panels talking about issues for people my age, that kind of thing. And I'm like, this is kind of fun. So I worked my way up, and eventually right out of college, I was a segment producer for Fox and Friends, which is the morning show on Fox News Channel. I actually worked with the guys that are still on it, Steve Doocy and Brian Kilmeade. Edie Hill was the female at the time. And I did about a year with them, all kinds of crazy stunts. I remember booking Ringling Brothers, the circus. I was there for Blues Traveler. I've met John McCain. I couldn't even name the amount of people that just cycle through there. And it was such an amazing experience for a 22-year-old. But after about a year doing it, I kind of thought, I'm not really sure I like this anymore. And for a few reasons, I think one was I now realize that one of my favorite parts about being in the news business was going out of the newsroom and meeting people and talking to them about what gets them going, whether it's a highly controversial topic or it's just something that is a local community issue that people want to know about, heartwarming stories. I've done everything. I finished off as an environmental reporter, but I really like being out of the newsroom. I like talking to people, and a producer sort of sits behind the scenes. They're behind a desk, and they often hand over what they're doing to the talent, as they're called. And the talent doesn't always get it right the way that you had envisioned it. So a few times of handing over scripts that I was like, that's not exactly what I was, that's not what I understood to be the facts of the matter. And then they just kind of take it wherever they want it, with the passion I have of just sort of getting out of newsrooms and seeing the news for myself, not just seeing it coming in on a screen. I left and went to grad school because, remember, at this time I still didn't want to be on camera. So I figured, well, I guess news is out of it for me. And I liked working with video. So that was the other reason I decided video journalism instead of print journalism. I went back to graduate school. I actually got a Master of Divinity degree in psychology and counseling, studying theology, philosophy. I thought I would go be a psychologist. That was kind of my next best thing. I was going to do a PhD in psychology. I had a professor, my last class of the last semester was preaching. I tried everything I could to get out of that class. I did not want to be a preacher. I didn't want to work in a church, but they said I was not going to graduate unless I did. And that professor was the one who got me thinking about going back to news, because his opening lecture was all about how every single one of us, no matter where we work or where we live, we're all storytellers. We're all in the process of telling some kind of story, whether it's our story or somebody else's story. And we have a responsibility to tell stories in a way that are honest and truthful and move our communities forward, not backward. And I never really thought about the higher purpose of journalism being something where you are framing ideas for people. I mean, you are really sort of entrusted with understanding what's going on and then delivering it. And so if you don't have a certain perspective about you, a curiosity, a skepticism, and you don't also have that ideal that you're there to try to be, part of the community and understanding what's going on, not to try to rip that community apart, then that to me was like, okay, maybe I'll go back and try this again. And this time I'm going to try it on camera. And so I did. And I figured I'll just try it for a year. And if I don't like it, I can always quit and go back to that PhD that I'd always planned on. And I really liked it. And so I started in Macon, Georgia. I went to Knoxville, Tennessee after that. Then I was in Tampa, Florida. Then I went to Seattle, Washington. Seattle, I finished up as an environmental reporter. I was really one of the only, if not the only, full-time television news reporters that covered the environment every day, day in and day out, other than I'm sure you're going to ask me about covering Antifa. Those were a few fun extra days that I had in my career. But yeah, so I finished up doing that. And then I'm now a YouTuber. I quit in 2019 and I have a YouTube channel, and I'm enjoying kind of looking at things from the outside now. Okay.
Now there's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to do two things first. One, super chat. Did McCain smell evil? Which I don't think requires an answer. The second thing is I'm going to bring Robert in because I saw him appear, and now I'm going to change the layout and put the layout like such. There we go. This is beautiful. This is symmetrical, and it pleases my OCD eye. Okay, but Alison, let's back up straight to the beginning. Questions I always love to know. How many siblings, growing up, what was your childhood like? Or your parents, what did they do? And how did that shape who you became?
Yeah, those are all really good questions and important for a journalist to ask. So I have two younger brothers, and I grew up, I was born in Pittsburgh. Funny fact, my husband and I were actually born a couple months apart, a mile down the street from each other. And then were taken to separate parts of the country. And then we recently met back when we were 35 and got married. And that's a whole nother story that could be fun to talk about. But moved to Florida. My dad's an orthopedic surgeon, so there's lots of business there and lots of older people that need new hips and knees, which is what he specializes in. My mom is a radiologist, so they're both medical doctors, which really did sort of set the stage for how I see life, because when I was very young and say my babysitter didn't show up, my parents often took me to the hospital with them, and I saw people dying at a very young age, and I'd never walked out of those hospitals thinking that I wanted to be a doctor and fix them. In fact, I wanted to stay away from hospitals as much as I could after that. But I did start asking some pretty big questions, even at a very young age, about why we're here, where are we going when it's all over, if it's not about money and fame, because it can't possibly be, considering the richest person is going to end up just like the poorest unknown person, then what is the point of all of this? And I think that sort of shaped the way I approach journalism, because I saw everybody as an equal. I don't understand when I see kind of the superiority that leaks into mainstream media these days, the sort of top-down model and the nose up in the air. How can you possibly think this? How could these people act this way? Without realizing that we all have the ability to act and think just like our adversary, given the right circumstances. And so I've always kind of approached my life and my work from that model, which came at a very young age, just understanding that death is the great leveler. And that's something I studied when I went to graduate school too, like how people think about the meaning and the purpose behind all this. It's one of the great questions that all the great philosophers and theologians have asked over the centuries. And so that's really shaped a lot of how I've pursued my career. Being the oldest child, I think also you tend to be sort of the more, perfectionist, performance-driven person. So I had a professor who actually noticed I had a family member struggle with addiction pretty seriously for quite a while. And when I went to graduate school, that's what I thought I wanted to do, was work specifically with addicts. And I told this professor that I wanted to do that because I couldn't save this particular person. So I was just going to go save everybody else. And he was really astute, and he looked at me and said, "Have you ever gone to therapy?" And I said, "No, I don't need therapy." And he's like, "Becoming a therapist to save people because you have an issue you haven't worked out yet is probably not the best reason to be a therapist. So maybe you want to go to see a counselor," and handed me his friend's business card. And I was so offended and insulted. But after a couple of days, I thought, well, all right, he's my professor. I'll go check it out. And I went to therapy for a couple of years, actually. And by the end of it, I said, I do not want to be a therapist. So that combined with my preaching professor and his opening lecture to think about stories and listening to the stories of your communities and all that stuff, I think those two things combined are really what landed me back in news.
Why did your parents only use one L in Allison?
Because they wanted to curse me for the rest of my life. However, I will say that I had one person in one of my newsrooms say that I'm one L of a gal. And I like to say that everybody else may have to overcompensate with a second L, but I only need one. I'm a one and done kind of gal. So I don't need two L's to prove anything. One is enough.
But there was no specific ancestor.
Nope. Oh, nothing. No. But this is the thing I've always struggled with. Isn't that Allison? Like, you know what I mean?
I think of Ali's son, like you're the son of Muhammad Ali. That's how I can remember that it's one L. But I thought maybe there was some backstory. So it was just it wasn't like a misspelling on the birth certificate or anything like that.
No, no, it was intentional.
And I got to tell you, Allison, I should be not specific because they might know who I'm talking about. I know therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists. For some reason, they tend to be the most. I don't know if type A personality is the right way to describe it. They tend to be the most eccentric people on earth. But, the one does not need to be a well-rounded functional human in order to give good advice and be able to diagnose problems in other people. So they still know their trade. But yes, I would imagine having gone to a therapist, much like having become a lawyer, you realize having some experience with a lawyer, you might not ever want to go into the practice of law, having dealt with a lawyer. So what is the master's in divinity? Like I didn't even know what that was when I was reading about it.
A master of divinity is typically what pastors get, and then they get ordained. So if you're going to be a theologian and you're going to stay in academia, you will get a master's of theological studies. Typically, it's a 2-year degree and it's highly academic. It's not pastoral or vocational. When you get a Master of Divinity, you have to do an internship. Most people do internships at a church. Of course, I did not want to work in a church. I wanted to work with drug addicts. And so I worked at a methadone maintenance clinic, which was another reason why I decided I did not want to go into drug counseling. I am easily influence, let's put it that way, when it comes to people who have a sob story and are like, please help me, you know. So I have to be really careful with people who are like, please help me, I had to drink, I had to do all these things, but I still should get my methadone. I'm like, can you, because it just turns out that former drug addicts tend to be better off with current drug addicts when it comes to calling out their BS. And I was a family member of one at the time. And I'd always hear their sob stories. I'd feel really bad for them. And I had to sort of slap myself and be like, no, you know, they're responsible adults. They need to, you know, they need to sort of take responsibility for their actions. And you're not here to enable them and their problems. But that's what a Master of Divinity would give you, would be more on the ground experience. And then most people take that degree and then they go on to be a preacher. But a lot of people, actually, I know lawyers. I've had a lawyer, a constitutional attorney on my channel before. He has a Master of Divinity degree, I believe from Harvard Divinity School, and then ended up getting his law degree. So I know lawyers that have MDivs. I know journalists, other journalists who have MDivs. So it's a degree that often is used, obviously, to go into a church, but it can be used for a lot of different things. It's just the big difference is you're going to go do you're going to do some kind of internship, some kind of vocational work before you get the degree. And then if you want to be a pastor, typically then you have to find a denomination that's going to support your ordination. But I didn't go through that process.
Did you ever think about that? I mean, my brother got a master's in divinity from Yale, but it was part of a philosophy track that he was on.
Mm-hmm.
Did you? But I knew a lot of the students there. Did you ever consider going into the pastoral route?
Mm-mm. No, I would listen to these horror stories of people in my classes talking about they'd argue over words in the hymnal or whether you're going to use the little plastic cups versus you're going to dip the bread. And here I am again, remember, like I grew up watching people die as a little kid. I'm like, this stuff doesn't matter. Why are you guys arguing about this in the church? I never really I still to this day don't understand why these tiny little things drive people apart when they're supposedly gathering together for this very large and in many ways, you know, incomprehensible thing that they're trying to follow. And yet maybe that's why they do it. Maybe it's a control thing. Hey, we're all here to talk about God, which is like the biggest, most unknowing topic we could talk about. But let's spend 90% of the time arguing about whether we should drink out of little plastic cups. It never really made sense to me. So that was one reason. But I think the other part was just that I was really interested in, I like working with people one-on-one. And I think as a journalist, I did that a lot. I used to say I was kind of still doing that work, but with a camera, and I never had to see my clients again. I used to joke about that. Like it was sort of like a therapist with a camera, but we didn't have to see our clients except for that one time. And that was back when I was doing a lot of general assignment work because I showed up at people's doors sometimes after they had the absolute worst experiences of their lives. When I was general assignment, we would do, I would cover maybe a murder once a week sometimes, depending on the market that I was in. And so actually that degree helped out quite a bit, just being able to sit with people who have lost somebody that they love. And sometimes you're the only one they talk to. You might be the first person who shows up. And so it does help with that. But I prefer sort of the one-on-one thing. I never really wanted to be in control. That's the other reason I think I didn't like being a producer, because producers, they like to look at the whole show and they like to tell you what to do. And, they're keeping tabs on all the other reporters and the anchors and the scripts and the stories that are coming in. And I've never really enjoyed that. I like kind of doing my own thing. I sort of work as a lone wolf and I don't really want to know what, in other words, I don't want to be like the puppeteers pulling strings on other people. I just like to focus on my thing and go really deep on it versus being a mile wide and an inch deep.
Are you surprised at all to deal with a case in the news that's a murder case, that there's been almost no coverage and basically nothing in the trial either from an addiction medical perspective? Because like on our locals board, Viva barneslaw.locals.com, a lot of medical people that are on there are saying they don't understand that. They're saying that this could be much better understood by someone who has medical expertise in the addiction space, especially about the way the drugs interact, about ways that other behaviors that can be explained. And while there was some evidentiary limits, not that degree of it, surprised at all that there's been no, not only in the trial, but no journalistic, even sort of curiosity on the addiction side of the angle. Is it because it just doesn't fit the bigger, broader media narrative?
Are you talking about the Chauvin trial?
Yes. The Chauvin, George Floyd.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess it is kind of surprising. The way that I guess, and we can get into this if you want, that editorial decisions are often made, well, it starts with the concepts that people even already bring to the table, which is why it's important for newsrooms to have journalists who have different experiences and different ideas about things, and they don't just all think exactly the same way, because maybe if you don't have somebody who has had the background that I had, for instance, somebody who had a family member who has dealt with addiction, that's not even on your mind. You're thinking about whatever else it is that you experienced when you were a kid, or you've experienced out on the streets as a reporter. And so I actually think that, you know what, I'll call my old station and see if they'll be interested in your idea. But I think it is weird. And maybe it is just because everybody's so focused on the other sort of hot topics. And I do think like local news stations that are trying to pull this apart are always looking for new ways to keep it going. Even the national news stations, they're just trying to find what's another angle. So I would be surprised if it was purposeful. They were like, oh, we shouldn't do the addiction angle, but maybe it is. I mean, maybe it is because if you have a narrative where you're already trying to take sides with the victim, and then maybe that would expose ideas that wouldn't be aligned with that narrative. And so maybe it's both. Maybe they're purposely keeping that out. And maybe they also just, it's a cognitive bias issue of just in-group bias. They're not even thinking about it because they're already kind of working down that one narrative. But I think that's a great idea. Maybe you should start a newsroom. Well, you guys already sort of have one, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and apparently, the idea is that some people might be watching and then we see the effect later on in public discourse or certain decisions. Alison, I got one. It goes back to the interviewing the family or someone who's just been involved in a murder situation, and you actually show up at their front door. Mm-hmm. It's going to be something along the lines of the same question I asked Dershowitz. You show up at someone's door as media at probably one of the, not probably, let's just say objectively the hardest time in their life that they're ever going to be in. You're there to some extent. Do you not feel that you're there to some extent exploiting of the situation, and how do you sit down with them knowing what you're going to do with the story afterwards? Not be unfair or inaccurate in the story, just that it is a story for public consumption. And is there not a part of you that feels that this is somehow exploitive of their tragedy for purposes of media?
I can see how people would see that. I think it's exploitive if the person is not interested in telling their story. If they want to tell their story, I feel like that's their right to do so, and you're the vehicle that gives them the opportunity to do so. There are situations where people have been in need of, say there's detective work that this could help with, or, we worked with Crime Stoppers quite a bit as a local news reporter. So you would be able to put the information out there, on a larger platform and allow people the opportunity to even help solve crimes. And I've actually had quite a few people, I've never had a person tell me that they wish they hadn't talked about what happened to them. But I've had many, many, many people say it really helped them process a lot, and that the outpouring from the community really helped them move forward. So I can understand how people see that. And I think maybe in some circumstances, that's a fair conversation to have. I just, in my experience, if you show up and you say, hey, listen, and I always made sure that I didn't have the posture that I needed you to say yes. Like, there are a lot of managers, I think, who put pressure on reporters to come back with a story. And if you don't come back with it, then it's like, you got to find some way to fill the 5 o'clock news on your own. I've had managers say that to me when people said, no, I don't want to talk. But I would always, if I offered it one time and I show up at your door, like, listen, hey, this is what we're here to do. Obviously, I work for a TV station. I'm not trying to pretend I'm one thing and then I'm going to turn into another. Do you want to talk about it? And they say no, then you don't push them anymore. And there have been reporters I remember being on scenes with, like, always be that reporter that shows up if it's a group thing where everybody's showing up at the same time, it's breaking news. And you're like, oh God, why did they put her or him on it? Because they're going to be the person that's going to be like, you have to talk. And they're like sticking the microphone in there. And there's like, please, you're giving us all a bad name and you're going to ruin this for everybody. And so I feel like it's a responsibility that we have to just, if a person says no, then you walk away and you let it go, and managers should be okay with that. And if you're a manager that's not okay with that, then I think, yeah, then that is pressuring somebody to exploit another person's story. But if the person wants to tell it, I don't know. There are a lot of benefits that come from that.
Well, you mentioned the sort of therapeutic objective that partially informed pursuing journalism. What else made you want to pursue journalism in particular?
Well, I really loved, as a kid, I loved video storytelling. I just go out to my barn. I've always had a horse ever since I was a little kid, and I'd actually put together really funny movies and stuff. So I don't think I was really young thinking about journalism. I liked putting together videos. And then I guess I got a little bit older, and I don't know if I just got this sort of more serious tone about where I wanted to go with my life. And so that, I guess that was that combination of, I really like recording history. I like seeing things for myself and capturing it and then sharing with others. I think I used to like doing that at the barn. You know, I dress my horse up and stuff because I didn't really have a care in the world back then. So I didn't know about what was going on around me and you know, in other parts of the world. And so then as I guess I became more conscientious of issues in my community and our country and around the world, I think that just kind of the knowledge with the passion for just and enjoying seeing things firsthand and using a camera to do so. I think those things just combine to bring me to where I am now.
I'm going to bring this chat up where Jamie says, I dare say many families in grief trauma know the difference between media there for a story or ones that want their loved one's story told, which is a fair point. But this is the, I guess, where the question was going. Everyone on this channel might have a certain contempt for the media the way it is today. And
I mean, you're only wearing an anti-media shirt. I didn't know that you had that kind of crowd.
So the question is this. I suspect the media has always been this way, the way we see it today, but maybe to a lesser degree, or maybe I'm wrong. And, you know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it is today. And it's only gotten worse. Has it always been this way to a greater or lesser degree? Or did you notice it just went over the top at some point and became pure divisive, pure exploitive, pure clickbait, rage bait content?
Well, so I was going to follow up with a question. Is that what you're when you talk about being worse, is that what you mean?
What I mean, yeah, I mean more in terms of promoting that type of content for clicks, but also I would say also misrepresenting stories for the purposes of driving those narratives, which they know or think will get the clicks. So on the one hand, profit-driven and divisive, and then the flip side, inaccurate in the narratives that they're promoting.
Yeah, as opposed to the mythology. Like there was a good AP report out today done with a polling company about the continued decline and collapse in confidence in journalism. And what they found was that most people really just wanted journalists to give them facts, stories of interest. Now, one can argue about that's what they really want when you look at ratings, but but that they don't think they're getting that. They think they're getting basically political, partisan lecturing of various kinds. To what extent did you experience that early on? Is that something that's evolved? Is it overstated currently? What's your thoughts on that?
The more that I learn about the history of journalism, the less convinced I am that it's any worse today, because I've heard about how terrible.
His Girl Friday era, because that's like I think in 1940s pre-professional class domination of journalism, that at least there was at least a little bit of that. I mean, still some rage bait, still some clickbait of its own kind at its own time, but not as much political lecturing, in part because of sort of the class differential. And that was our first cinematic reference. Great film, His Girl Friday. So it's not. So you don't think there really wasn't ever a glamour era? That's more nostalgia than legitimate, or is it just not as bad today as we think it is?
Well, I have heard people like Matt Taibbi say that, I don't know if people aren't familiar with him. He's an independent journalist now. He did some work for Rolling Stone. Does some pretty good work.
He tries to be Hunter Thompson. Sometimes he achieves, sometimes he doesn't.
Yeah. So, well, he talked a little bit about like when he was starting out in the business, it was more of a blue collar profession. And now it's turned into a little bit of a celebrity profession, especially with the rise of social media and everybody kind of being able to sort of grow their own brand And I think there's some truth to that. I think now having sort of this class of people who are going to the same colleges and living in sort of the same intellectual echo chamber, and then add to that the internet and social media. I do think for me, the biggest difference I've noticed since I got into the business is not so much that there's like there wasn't bias before and there's bias now. To me, it's the hubris and the condescension, almost the arrogance about the ignorance. Like I've become both more aware of the ignorance of my profession and also their arrogance around that ignorance. And I think those are two very dangerous things to put in combination with each other, especially at like the time we're living right now with COVID, for instance, where we're supposed to be debating these policies that are taking away people's freedoms. You know, I'm shocked to see journalists creating lines where you are anti-American if you're asking questions about this, or you're some kind of conspiracy theorist simply for debating these policies. And so it makes me realize that they're ignorant of the ramifications of the other sides that are out there that are pushing back on this, doctors, scientists who are not saying what you're seeing on mainstream news and should have a chance at the table to talk about this stuff. So they're ignorant of it, but they're also arrogant about their ignorance. And it's just a never ending cycle, because the more hubris you have about what you don't know, the less likely you are to seek out information. So to me, that I see that as one of the biggest changes since I got in, is like, it's not just that we don't understand, but we don't want to understand you. That in other words, not even just that we don't want to understand you, but we don't even want to allow your voice at the table, because we've determined for the public that you are any number of things that are unhelpful and potentially dangerous. And so we're just going to silence you. And it's obviously not working. I hear from people in my comment section all the time on my channel, not just about mainstream media, but big tech. And they think by silencing voices that they're going to keep ideas from spreading, and somehow people are going to end up on their side of whatever the issue is. But I feel like it's actually driving people more and more into distrust and skepticism, and more into their corners of reality, and not doing what they think they're doing. They think that they're locking down harmful information and they're saving the public from itself, but I don't think they're doing that at all.
Yeah, and to what extent do you see that what's happening in big tech sort of expanding and extending the kind of gatekeeper role that the media seem to usurp to itself to an extraordinary degree? And to what degree have you experienced that in the YouTube space?
Oh, it's huge. It's obvious over even just the last year. I think that YouTube, for instance, has made a concerted effort to promote corporate news. I feel like I would do better on YouTube if I went back and worked for my old employer, because they get promoted more than the independent voices, especially if you're somebody who's challenging mainstream narratives. You're a little bit riskier for YouTube. And so whenever I go to, like, I'll do the incognito window every once in a while and just check news feeds, and it's all Fox, BBC, CNN, NBC, CBS. It's all these corporate news stations, which is not like they're necessarily saying anything that's more factual. I just feel like YouTube sees them as less risk. I don't know if it's just because they all have relationships behind the scenes, but the ideas that end up on people's screens, including the journalists, are informing their understanding of reality, and they're missing nuances to issues that are really important. And so then those are reflected on the 6 o'clock news and on the 24-hour news cycle. So it's a never ending cycle of ignorance, where it's not that the ideas and the voices are not out there. You're just not allowed to hear them. And even the journalists are falling victim to that. I do know many people who are in the industry who I feel like are not setting out every day to try to brainwash Americans, but they're completely unaware of what's going on. And I blame them in part for that. But I also blame the fact that, like, this information isn't always easy to find. And so if, say, you're in a world where you're reading the New York Times, you're reading whatever else, and not to say, again, this is not an excuse. They should be looking outside of that. But the collusion, it is, in my opinion, collusion. There's something more than just like, it's just by chance. These are a couple big corporations and they happen to align. There's more going on there, especially when you see how, you have you're going with, like, say, the CDC, for instance, or another government organization where journalists, it used to be, I thought, that you question the government. Now it's like, no, we just take whatever the government says, unless it's Trump's government. We take the government at their word. We even have them. We have CIA agents or whatever else on as our pundits now. We're paying them to give their ideas on things. And then if you're somebody who's questioning that kind of stuff, you're pushed out as a conspiracy theorist. And then on top of that, tech will only promote those ideas. So like the thing I sell to people who are even willing to listen is just all of us don't know something. So I don't really look at people and say, shame on you that you don't know this. But I do say shame on you that you are arrogant about what you don't know. I had a friend, the other day tell me that if somebody that she was dating was waiting to get one of the COVID vaccines, that she would dump them. This is a journalist, all right, who thinks that you're just totally nuts if you're waiting to get the vaccine. To me, that, like, you can't tell me that kind of arrogance is not bleeding into the coverage.
Do you mean waiting as in like waiting in line, or you're waiting to see the results in others before you get it?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. You're just kind of like not sure if you want to get it yet.
Well, okay. So Alison, some people, I don't know where I saw the critique, but some people say that you tend to attribute, the expression is, don't attribute to malice that which can be explained by incompetence. Mm-hmm. Some people think that you are attributing to incompetence or ignorance that which should be attributed to malice when it comes to the media. And so you've been in it for longer. I think that any benefit of the doubt I was ever prepared to give to the media in terms of not being malicious and deliberate in the misinformation is out the window. And the Project Veritas confirmation, like I needed it, like I needed this expose to convince me of it. I think this proves that it's not that it is not ignorance. It's not deliberate. It's malicious and it's deliberate misinformation. I guess you don't want to speak ill of any of your employers.
No, I don't mind speaking ill of my former employers.
It's true. Did you see it? Because do they say, go out, this is what we want, and spin it that way, even if it's not what you get?
No, I've never seen somebody say, if you don't get this, you still have to say that. But there are steps that lead into that. So listen, we all know that in history, the vast majority of people that have done extremely evil things think they're doing something right. Timothy McVeigh is a great example of this, right? I mean, there are people who have been mass murderers Hitler, who believed, had somehow told themselves that they were doing something for their communities, not against it. So the first thing I think we all have to understand, and I'm not saying this is any less dangerous, I think it's more dangerous. A quote I bring up a lot from C.S. Lewis is, I'd rather live under a robber baron than a moral busybody, because the moral busybody tortures you with the approval of their own conscience. And I think more than anything, that is the problem that we're seeing in today's world, not just with journalists, but in many different industries. And so I try to help people understand how these editorial decisions are made, because it would actually be much easier to deal with an organization that is like a mafioso. We're out to brainwash. We know we're doing evil. We know we're picking and choosing for evil, okay? Because when you're saying malfeasance, you're telling me that you know their intention.
Yeah, well,
now you could say, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, how about not for evil, but rather just for money, for power, for influence, which, is probably a more accurate description of evil than evil itself.
No, and absolutely. Like, if you were to say to me that they're going out telling you something to elicit the kind of world they want to live in, then I would say absolutely. Absolutely. But I won't go down the path that, like, the vast majority are conspiring in the morning before they go into the newsroom saying, how can I pretend, even though I know this is real, I'm going to pretend it's this way because I'm an evil, sinister person. The vast majority of them all chronically think actually that they're your savior. So that's what you have to deal with first. And that's a very difficult position. I had a manager tell me a couple times on several different issues, we're not going to allow this particular voice on our channel related to climate change, for instance. That was one topic. Like, we're not going to, anyone who has any questions about this, we wouldn't let them on the channel. Everybody knows, if you're paying attention, like, climate change is a very complex topic. We could do a year on this topic right now, and not just in the hour and a half that we have left. And so to just not even allow different nuances and varieties to, like, what the questions that scientists are asking and what's going on, because you think that you're protecting the public, that is far more common than the other idea that a lot of people have, which does happen. Okay. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. There is legit propaganda that you would say, like, handed down by the government. I believe that stuff's happening at the top. I think we saw that, say, for instance, like with the DNC and the 2016 election. And so that kind of thing does happen. It's just that if you want to understand the vast majority of how decisions are made, it's made in a group of people who think very similarly and have a similar amount of hubris about what they're up to. And so if you're somebody who wants to actually change that, you got to approach it with that in mind. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. The way I describe it is a subspecies of a problem that's happening in law, in aspects of medicine, and aspects of now science, and aspects of public health, which is that the two things. One is that the professional class as a class is taken over a lot of these occupations, including now mostly journalism. Though I have people who work for me. They were like 30-year journalists, worked at small newspapers all across the country, old school, just the facts kind of personality, like people imagine what an old school journalist is supposed to be. But those small newspapers are almost all gone. And what's dominated is once we professionalized journalism, I thought we damaged journalism permanently, because it was going to then reflect the prejudices and proclivities and parochialisms of the professional class. Mm-hmm. But the second aspect that I think you hit on is, to me, a great journalist, like a great lawyer, traveler, political analyst, is naturally very curious. Mm-hmm. And what's striking to me about so many journalists these days is the shocking lack of curiosity they have just as part of their personality. And that's what creates the sort of condescension that their class biases help enforce. Was that your experience? And how was your one? Also, it's sort of two questions turned into five that we'll call it a Senate question. But to what degree, where did your curiosity come from, and how often did you experience the lack of it or the presence of it with other journalists over your career?
Oh, there's a huge lack of curiosity. And again, that goes back to why I guess they're ignorant, right? So I'm glad you brought that up, because if you're not curious, you are then ignorant, and then you're arrogant about that. And so, I think for me, I really kind of believe it's a personality thing. I think you can hammer somebody over the head as many times as you want in a journalism classroom, but if they're just not interested in that, then it doesn't matter what you tell them. I know people in the business that I literally just have to turn my phone off. I can't talk to them sometimes because, like, I have to like take a minute and then like revisit it the next day, because my blood pressure will go up with exactly what you're talking about. Like, do you realize you have a responsibility to be curious? Do you realize this is your only job is to be curious and to ask questions, and to not just write people off, especially huge swaths of people, thinking that somehow you're the only sane person and all these other people are crazy. It's nuts to me that anyone could approach a situation like that, where you're just like, especially if you're a journalist, why are they thinking that? Now, you can still walk away and absolutely disagree, but you just like not even want to visit and understand the phenomenon that you're covering. That to me is nuts. So yeah, I saw that quite a bit. I kind of wonder, I don't want to be like a boomer saying this, but I do wonder if there's part generational issues here. I don't know if it's like you grow up with the internet at your fingertips. When I was growing up, I can't believe I just said that. I feel like my parents. But when I was growing up and I was doing book reports, I literally had to go to the library. I had to pull books out. I had to use what was the Dewey Decimal System or something, right? I had to like go look everything up, and I had to pull the books out of the shelf, and I had to look up the page that it was on, and I did my whole book report that way. And now it's just like you just Google something and you just think, oh, well, Google told me, so it's there. Well, okay, well, first off, Google, I have been a victim of the fact that you could Google my Antifa video a year ago when it was going bonkers and I was getting like 250,000 views a day, 10, 12,000 subscribers a day. Boom. All of a sudden you Google the exact title. It doesn't even come up. You cannot find it unless you go to my channel, or if you use like DuckDuckGo, you can find it. So you're already dealing with that now the way we're processing information, the way that we're physically seeking information gives us this, I feel like, false sense of omniscience about things, and then and really like requires no effort in the actual physical mechanical effort of seeking information. And then on top of it, it's only sort of giving you what it wants you to know anyway. And so there's just this combination here. But yeah, absolutely, there's a huge lack of curiosity. It's just, I guess for me, it's hard to know because, well, I'll show you. You know, I have this book, Manufacturing Consent. Which,
yes, Noam Chomsky. Hold on, let me take this.
Right, and so it's like, you know, this book makes it hard to make the case that newsrooms weren't manufacturing consent 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that we've been in the process of trying to get the public to do what we want them to do in the newsrooms. And so I have a hard time, I guess, the more I read the history of that kind of stuff, it's hard for me to believe this is a brand new phenomenon. That said, I do think the internet has definitely changed things. Ratings has changed things. And the 24-hour news cycle has changed things. I also just think, I don't know if it's just a generational thing too. Like, I don't know if and maybe the actual, I've started to get some hope with the younger journalists, like the really young ones, maybe the ones that are still contemplating or you know, haven't been in the business for that long, but the ones that are my age, I've kind of given up on.
Well, I
don't know what
how
that
much,
is.
going to the generational aspect, because Jonathan Haidt, some others have talked about this, how much it sort of ties into journalism. That the sort of, you know, if it bleeds, it leads, of the late 80s, early and throughout the 90s, TV journalism in particular led to sort of all of the scares about childcare centers and being kidnapped, and, you know, everybody, and all of a sudden we developed, for millennials, they grew up in a play date culture, safe space culture, that
Right.
not only has influenced everything that related to it, but I think it taught them as a society that curiosity is dangerous. Curiosity is scary. Curiosity is risky. So
Yep.
be safe. The people who get curious get into trouble. And to how much do you think that could have played a role in this sort of generational shift where we see with this new wave of journalists, particularly given how young journalism is, which never seeks to shock me? Like the White House press corps, they're all 25-year-olds. Like, how in the world they're going to ask a question about Ukraine and Russia? They're 25. They're 3 years out of Tufts. I mean, come on.
Right.
But how much do you think that could have been an influence?
I think a lot. Yeah. And cause I just did a video on my channel talking about some of the training that the managers in the newsrooms are going through. And they're not using the term safe space anymore. They're using the term brave space, but it's still kind of this tone that even though they use the term diversity, I don't buy that they really mean full diversity of thought. And so, yeah, this idea that you can go to HR now, or you can be canceled by your own coworkers or on the internet immediately. I do think there are a lot of people who are really scared that they're going to say something wrong or ask the wrong question. And I think this is terrible, but I think for a lot of people, whether they realize they're doing this or not, it's safer to repeat a falsity that everybody's saying than to say something true that could get you in trouble. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people. Journalists obviously should not be like that. But I do sometimes wonder. And then, so to your point about how young they are, well, there are a couple of factors at play there. So the turnover is really high. There are these retirement buyout packages that companies are offering. For instance, we had a few years ago, I think we must have had 6 of our senior staff take the retirement buyout, and the company was basically just trying to get rid of the highest salaries and then hire people for half the price. So yeah, you're getting younger people that are willing to do a lot more work for a lot less. And the smarter people who are thinking, well, I want more time to understand this topic. I want to be able to do more research, or I want to be able to have more time even just to present it in TV news. Now 90 seconds is really the cutoff for a lot. Some people in some stations have to keep it to 1:15. So for some of these complex topics, like if you're somebody who who wants to be curious, and you want to seek out alternative viewpoints, and you want the time to be able to understand them and the time to be able to present them in the nuance that they deserve, you're probably not going to keep working in the business. And that, I guess, that ultimately is the point of manufacturing consent too, is like, you're in the business because you're able to sort of conform to these standards, and you eventually leave if you can't. And I guess that is part of the reason why I got out too, was just, there was a time when I wasn't always awake, right? I would never say that, like, that's why I don't like to come down on people for just not knowing everything, because I don't know everything. I've had some independent journalists who have been very kind to me in the YouTube world to be like, Allison, did you think about this? Because I just wasn't introduced to a lot of the stuff. The difference though, is that when they say that, I'm like, hungry for knowledge and I want to know what they're talking about, versus saying, oh my gosh, and rolling my eyes and calling them a conspiracy theorist and walking away. And that, I think, is really the big difference in the people who are in the business who want to know.
Well, Alison, okay, I'm bringing up this chat because Elijah Har says, have you actually watched the Project Veritas clips of CNN higher-ups? They actually admit on video to creating propaganda. And I'll just preface this, where they're using the word propaganda, and we wished the numbers would be higher for fear. The spit, I mean, I understand the way people are viewing that because the guy uses the word propaganda, but basically just saying there is, we wanted to hype up what were the actual numbers. We wished they would be worse so that we could use them even more for fear and political purposes, but they weren't actually making false stories to be true, except potentially by exaggerating through fear. But this is the thing though, manufacturing consent, my understanding, the whole purpose of that book was that it shows what happens when the media works in tandem, but in an undisclosed manner, with political leaders and with political parties or to political ideologies, in that all that they are actively doing is promoting spin and propaganda to push forward an idea, to fabricate consent as opposed to obtain it through information. And so it goes back to the question, you have Project Mockingbird, which is well before the what is it they call it, the mainstream media news cycle or whatever. It seems that it's always been there, and it's only now that people are discovering it. And so this fight to maintain that power is becoming ever increasingly bitter, and it's becoming a more forceful fight where the media now realizes that it's losing that veil of secrecy. The lowly hoi polloi are waking up to it, and so they have to fight now through other means, through big tech censorship, to suppress the democratizing of this pattern that's always been around by censorship and cancellation on the social medias.
Well, I mean, very much the internet created the possibility of democratizing so much access to information and self-education. While it allowed people to be lazy and not do the kind of investigative research they would normally do, it also afforded the opportunity for those that were curious to find information they could never get access to before. And it's a major threat to the institutional gatekeeper's role. What's interesting to me is how many journalists, and I wonder how much you ran into this, because you're describing two different phenomenon. One phenomenon is because of the economic restructuring of the newsroom, it's effectively going to dumb it down for a limited class of people with limited access to information, with limited time, with limited curiosity. That's who's going to be giving the news every day. And so it creates a culture that's just, its absence of curiosity and class bias is going to produce an outcome without any malevolent or deliberate intent of any kind. And at the same time, sort of parallel there too, you have this competition that's arising that poses a risk to the institutional role as gatekeepers. And it seems like a lot of the young journalists at the top of the echelon of media establishment power see themselves almost like clerisy. They see themselves like the old priest of the 1500s, that they are the guardians of truth for your own good. And that anybody that interferes with that is undermining the truth, which only they have been gifted with their credential to know and understand. How much is that mindset present in the journalism that you dealt with?
Yeah, a lot. And that's kind of what I was trying to say earlier, is that to me is far more problematic and more dangerous than what most people think is happening behind the scenes. So let's talk about Project Veritas for a second, because I did watch those videos, and I actually was far more, I guess I wasn't shocked, but I was more disappointed when I watched or listened to their tapes with Jeff Zucker, because he's in charge. And the stuff that he was saying was it's exactly what a lot of people we're suspicious of. So again, I'm not totally sure it was very shocking, but to have somebody like that, see, that's where that would be something I would point out as like, okay, that's propaganda. When you have a manager who's sitting in an editorial meeting like that, and they're like, this is how we're going to cover it. This is what we're going to do, blah, 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 blah. And they're sort of puppeteering their news staff. Like, that is highly problematic. I was actually I know that people on the outside watched that tape with the technical director, who, by the way, I should explain to people, if I understand if it's the same in their newsroom as it was in my newsrooms, a technical director is not somebody who's typically making any editorial decisions. They're the person who is putting like the lower third at the bottom of the screen, or taking, hey, that feed's coming in from over here and they're taking it in. He even says in one of his one of those asides, and can somebody explain to me, like, who was filming this? Was this a Tinder date? Was I understanding that correctly?
That's the story. These guys are such losers. I mean, so many of them are. You take them out and get them drunk, take them, you send them on. They think they're going to get on a hot date, and all of a sudden, boom, they'll just yip, brag. They're gifted. It's hard to see them as masterminds of malevolent propaganda.
Well, you shouldn't. Exactly. That's why you shouldn't. They're lemmings. That's what I want people to understand, is that most of them are lemmings, and they're like bots. They're walking around just like a lot of people are, but they're in a profession that has a lot of power.
NPCs, to use the meme character, they're true NPCs. Do you know what that is?
No.
Right.
It's what is it? A not programmed character?
So what is it? In various video games, you'll have a character that doesn't count.
Oh, yeah.
And
like
Ready
Player One.
Of journalists, they're just NPCs with a limited set of information.
Yeah, well, I can't remember who told me this, and maybe this is a famous quote, and it was just told me at some point a long time ago, that the person with a small mind and a lot of power is the most dangerous person. so yeah, you just kind of understand. Listen, I have a lot of actually really smart people, smarter than I am, who will leave me comments on my channel or write me emails and stuff and talk about their experiences. And one of the more astute comments that somebody wrote me was that it's typically the people at the very top only who really understand what's going on. And the vast majority of the propaganda vehicles are completely unaware that they're being used, and they're proliferating ideas that could potentially even be harmful. It's not the majority that are aware of how intentional some of this can be. So again, one of the purposes with my talking publicly about this is not just to complain about mainstream media for the audience that already hates them. It's to try to bridge also to the few people who might be awake left in the industry and say, listen, I understand your problems. I know what you're going through every day. I get it. But what you're doing and what you're participating in, and the hubris you have, and all these other things that I've named here today, these are really dangerous for this country. And we need to start reckoning with this now. If I were to just go to them and say, you're just pushing CIA talking points and you're in bed with the DNC. The average producer does not know that. They're not thinking to themselves they're in bed with the DNC. They don't even, so
Alice, I can tell you, it's not because I know the crowd. I just think, I think a lot of people are not going to believe you. I think they all know it. I think they accept it because they all get their bread buttered by the same guy, and it's good bread and it's good butter. And I think they may not know it when they get into it. This is my personal opinion. Because having gone through a big corporation, you don't know how it works when you get into it. You're idealistic. You think, as a young lawyer, you think you're going to go out and fight for justice, and then you get stuck, pushing paper and running to court only to have things delayed. And you see how the system works, and it disillusions you. I have no doubt that young journalists get started that way, but I think at some point, at least within the big enterprises, they have to appreciate at some point it's totally political, it's totally ideologically driven. And even at the smaller places, it's all political as well. It just depends on which side you're getting your butter breaded from, your bread buttered from. I think at some point they have to all realize, and they all do know it. It's just that they don't want to risk losing their jobs. The pay is too good, and they find a way to justify it to themselves, probably by saying we're doing it for the good. We're hyping up the numbers. We're making propaganda around COVID, but it's only to sensitize. Ultimately, it's only to sensitize people to the risks, and so we're justified in doing it.
I mean, my experience is a lot like prosecutors. So that they're blue-pilled feeders into the matrix machine. and that their insularity is extraordinary. And they have that they, I learned early on, I wanted to be a prosecutor when I was a kid, a young lawyer, would-be lawyer, because your only obligation is to do justice. And couldn't even get an interview while people that graduated at the bottom of the class were getting jobs. I didn't understand it. Finally, a professor explained it to me, tried to be polite about it, but I didn't take it as an insult. But basically, you need two traits for the system to work well. You need the guys plugging in the machine to be machine men, to be stenographers, to be on the factory line. And they need two traits. They need to completely lack curiosity, and they need to be not self-reflective at all. They need to be like vampires. When they look in the mirror, nothing is there. Otherwise, you get the Ed Snowden problem. I mean, how many people saw what Snowden saw over the decades and did nothing? I don't think most of those people are consciously malevolent.
Right.
I think most of them, because like with prosecutors, I thought these guys have to know, like, especially when they get caught and 20 years later, it turned out the person was innocent and it's overwhelmingly. Just watch the interviews with these people. They'll say, no, he's still guilty. No, still guilty. Mm-hmm. It's because what makes them useful to the machine, federal judges, same way. Yes. Is that they're not self-reflective, is that they're not self-aware, is that they're not curious about the world. Right. Now, the people at the top know what's going on, but is that you really do have a lot of NPC, mindless machinery on the everyday functionary role.
Yeah. And then the other things that we've talked about enable you to hide behind that. Oh, I just don't have the time. Oh, you don't give me the time to share this, or I don't have the time to understand this, or what. And I used to say that I didn't have the time, but eventually that wasn't a good enough excuse for me anymore. And I was like, if you don't give me the time and you don't reformat my position, I'm out of here. And they wouldn't. And so I left. And, there were other personal reasons, like we wanted to live in the middle of nowhere and they couldn't foresee how I could possibly do my job without living in the heart of Seattle. But, most of it was really, I just had gotten to this point where I was like, I no longer feel like I can just say, I just don't have the time. This is the best I'm going to do. I'm phoning it in every day. And this is going to be the rest of my life. To go back to the beginning of the stream, remember, like, I always have death. The Grim Reaper is always in the back of my head. And I don't want to be Allison, 90 years old, if I get to that point and look back and say, I just phoned it in every day because I didn't have enough time to tell the American public what was really going on. That's not a good enough excuse. And if it is, you got some waking up to do. But yeah, it's like, to go to the point of the bread and the butter and that kind of thing, again, somebody tweeted the other day that most journalists at this point may not even realize it, but are an arm for the Democrat Party. And I would say that's probably true. But remember, I guess it may be a semantics argument here, because the way I look at it is they're thinking to themselves, these ideas are true. These policies are true, like true, not just right, but true. They are the truth. They are this is what, so I guess I agree. It's not that I disagree that there's intentional pushing of narratives. I absolutely agree with that. What I'm trying to say that's different than what most people understand is the awareness of that the vast majority of people I worked with, again, to go back to my friend who won't date someone who's not getting the vaccine, she's just sitting there thinking that, like, that's un-American. She has this idea about her that it's un-American to be questioning this, and that it's or science denier and all these things. And so she's like, she would be somebody who would be going on the news, in my opinion, with that in the background of how she's reporting, just completely unaware of the other side, the pushbacks to that. And now you may say that's not a good enough excuse. And I agree, that's not a good enough excuse, but she's not somebody who, and this is the only point I'm trying to make, she's not somebody who's like going into work saying, I know this, I know that actually Johnson & Johnson or all these other, there could be problems behind the scenes. But I'm not going to tell anybody about that because, I hate the American public and I'm just going to push things that I know are lies. I'm going to just push lies on them. Like, the average person is not thinking that. They're thinking, they're thinking very messianically almost about how they're approaching what they're doing. That's the only nuance I was trying to.
They're priests who believe in the Pope.
Say that again.
They're priests who believe in the Pope.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. Exactly. Yeah.
Robert, by the way, put your mic a little closer so we can get the volume up. No, I would say it's more like party over, what is it called? Party over country, except on an ideological front, not just a political one. So yeah, I agree. When it comes to politics, it's party over country. You know, when it's Trump doing it, it's cages and it's a border crisis. When it's happening under Biden, it's enclosures and it's a challenge. When it comes to ideology, you know, when it's Trump with the vaccine, we might question it. When it's Biden with the vaccine, you're unscientific for questioning it. It's fitting, it's fitting reality around your preconceived notions, which, I mean, I think we're saying the same thing. It's just a question of how we interpret it in others.
Yeah, but to me, it's only a difference in intention. That's the only place where I feel like I depart from a lot of people who rail on mainstream media. It's not that I don't think you're right in a lot of the criticisms of these narratives they're pushing. The only difference I'm trying to make sure people understand is the level of awareness that and intentionality that the vast majority of them have. That's why I go back to the Project Veritas tapes for Zucker. I think for me, that is far more concerning than some technical director having a beer with a girl he thinks he's on a Tinder date with and maybe just trying to, you know, talk a big game. That guy's not the guy I'm worried about. The guy I'm worried about is Jeff Zucker and the way that he's approaching how he tells his staff what is acceptable to think about. And if you think about that over time, anyone who's willing to sit in a meeting like that for days, months, years is not going to be somebody who's asking good questions, but they're not sitting at home wanting to lie. That's the big difference. The vast majority are not sitting like, how can I conspire? How can I brainwash? How can I lie? They're just being the good lemmings. They're sitting in the meetings and they're just being the good lemmings, thinking that they're saving America. Go back to the Time article. Remember what was the headline?
Fortification of the election process.
Right. That was such a great example of the two ways of seeing exactly what we're talking about. One side's like, this is like a coup. This is a straight coup. And the other side is like, no, we're protecting you. We're protecting you. I really believe it.
Alison, some people are just going to say one side is right and the other side is a pathological liar, or, you know, or is playing the lawyer game, giving things good names so that you can swallow them better. I call them the euphemisms, and they play with them. There's no question. Where we're seeing the same thing. It's just you frame it the way you want.
Yeah, but
I do tend to think arguing intentions is irrelevant because you can never know someone's intentions. But when the outcome is the same, intentions no longer matter. And when the outcome is purely ideologically driven euphemisms to soften the truth or to exaggerate the truth, it all comes to the same. And I think it's why everyone is, losing all faith that might have been remaining in mainstream media. But one question I had for you, and I don't want to forget, you have 2 Emmys. And now the question is this: what did you get the Emmys for? And have you noticed backlash from your brethren for now taking the trajectory of journalism that you've taken? Because you have more freedom to report more honestly, and I'll say honestly without presupposing intentions. You can report on things that you would probably otherwise not be allowed to report on or would not get airtime in other media outlets. So what were the Emmys for? And have you noticed backlash for taking the path less traveled as far as journalists go?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Emmys because I actually saw that somebody in the comment section said an Emmy is like a crown from Burger King. So my husband went and got me this so I could wear this instead of my Emmy. So this is my Burger King crown. I'm much happier about this. Actually, I'm not, because I don't eat fast food, but that's a whole nother story for another day. I got my Emmys for environmental reporting. And actually, I think both of them were for... Yeah, they're both for just like a conglomeration of some of the stuff that I did. But I really do agree with the person who said that it's like a Burger King crown, because, I mean, not to like totally disparage it, but journalism awards in a lot of ways are pay to play. And so you got to spend a lot of money, and then you have to go to the expensive dinners and all these things. And so it's kind of annoying. And so stations will pay for you to submit, which my employers did. But I really dug my heels in on going to the award ceremonies because I didn't want to go to the award ceremonies. There were the worst overpriced meals and most terrible wine that I'd ever had, and give you terrible hangovers the next day. And so like my first Emmy I won, I was hiking. I didn't even go to the awards banquet. So my photographer buddy called me and said, we won. And I was like, great. all right, bye. So I'm just going to finish my.
And what was it like? What is it for specifically? They have categories. Was it best breakout journalist?
Mm-hmm.
Excellence in journalism, I believe.
Well, so it's like there's a ton of different categories. I mean, you could have overall excellence, environment, breaking news, 24 hours, feature. There's just like a bunch of different categories. So I won for the environmental category.
Now, why not stay the safe and easy path? Because it was if you stay on the institutional path, easy job, easy life, you know what narratives to stay within, you know what time frame is again. Instead, now you're living in an Airstream. So the what led to that shift?
Well, we're still working on the Airstream. If anybody who is watching knows how to refurbish an Airstream in Eastern Washington, we would love to have you come over and help us finish this because we would like to be living in it at this point.
Isn't that small? Aren't Airstreams small?
No, Robert, Airstreams can be small, big, and extremely expensive. And
how big is this Airstream?
Ours is 34 feet long.
It's a big one.
That still seems small. I guess you're not claustrophobic.
Well, we don't want to live in an Airstream in a city. We want to live in an Airstream on 100 acres of land. So the idea is what you sacrifice on the inside, you win on the outside. And we all, in my family, we're kind of like pro being outside, doing outside things. We have horses, we hike, we just do a lot of stuff outside. We don't really, other than ranting on YouTube, and editing videos, I don't like to be inside. And so it's kind of like, if we could do the tiny home thing, we could afford the kind of land that we want, because 5 acres at this point is not enough distance between me and my neighbor. I'd like to have a lot more than that. And so our plan is to move into that and then buy land, like a lot of land that if we were to buy that with a house already on it, like a big house that would be on 100 acres, we just wouldn't be able to afford it. So we're hoping to finish that, move into that, and then build something bigger. Once we get down that path, we'll probably die in the process, but that's ultimately the goal. And frankly, moving into that and having that lifestyle is what really gave me the opportunity to start seeing more freedom journalistically, because if you live in an expensive city like Seattle, you do need a 6-figure salary. And so then you do end up working for a big corporation. But it was a sort of a both and that I had this professional awakening where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then personally, I'm like, well, I also hate the city. So, hey, this is great. You know what? Let's just go live in the middle of nowhere where it's cheap. And then we don't need my 6-figure income anymore. I can quit. And so like when there are people that write me that are still in the business and will talk to me about, getting out and what they're planning to do and everything. And it does come down to these pragmatic decisions about, okay, go back to like the getting your bread buttered and whatnot. When you do start to get to the point where like, I'm having this crisis of conscience, you got to figure out you got to figure out how to pay the bills. And so that's part of the freedom, and not that we don't like that. I mean, we want to live that lifestyle, but it allows me to have the professional freedom that I have now.
Interesting. And was that like, so was that sudden? Was that, what was it like, Paul in Damascus? I mean, was it, what development did it reach that, okay, I'm going to go from NBC, Emmys, Seattle, upscale, urbane living to I'm going to be out in the country. I'm going to do my own thing and everything that comes with that.
Mm-hmm. Both. I think the undercurrent swell took a couple of years to get to, but then like the final moment, I remember, so I told you that like, if you're somebody who doesn't want to create any harm in the business and you recognize you only have so much time and opportunity to do the kind of reporting that you want to do. And I was an environmental reporter, so I was covering very complex topics. What I started doing was like, okay, that's an important issue to cover, but I don't feel like I can do it justice. So I don't want to oversimplify it. So I'll just do this other story, which I can do in 90 seconds or less. But then I started over time, I was like, but now I'm doing stories that are not interesting to me and they're not as important to the community, but I'm doing them because I can. I'm physically capable of accomplishing that in 4 hours a day, presented in 90 seconds or less. And so there was one time where a restaurant was switching off of plastic water bottles, and my boss wanted me to do a live shot. And a live shot is usually saved for big news. So like he wanted me to do a live shot outside a pizza restaurant about plastic water bottles. And I was like, I'm done. I have a master's degree in like philosophy. I want to be asking really big questions. I don't want to just be doing the jig outside of a pizza restaurant talking about plastic water bottles for the rest of my life. And so that was when I was like, okay, the time has come. So it wasn't like, that wasn't just the moment where all of a sudden I just sort of thought of that. We already had the Airstream at that point. We were already starting to renovate it, but we were just kind of like, yeah, tomorrow. We were kind of like in that phase, like maybe, next month or the month after. And then I think a lot of us, when we make these big life changes, there's something that we were preparing for, but then there's maybe one moment where we're like, okay, you know what? Now's the time. It's time now.
But I'm going to ask you, Alison, a question. You have a kid, right? What are you going to do about schooling, friends, play dates, those types of things? Is there a neighborhood like to lead to keep a kid occupied? Unless we were just hoping she would grow up like with the wild animals and go learn how to hunt her own food and do that. No, we're not going to be like in the middle of nowhere. We're thinking about. I mean, right now we live on 20 acres and there's a school district here. We're considering homeschooling. We're not totally sure where we're going to go with that path. We have a little ways to figure that one out. It will be hard, I think, if I'm, my husband travels a lot for work and say I'm still doing the YouTube thing. I'm not really sure I'm going to be the best like kindergarten teacher. So we'll see. But we're not planning on being, we're not moving to like, off the grid.
Yeah, totally. Well, we might be off the grid, but we'll probably still be 30 minutes or 45 minutes to like a school. I don't think we're going to be, we're not moving to the middle of Alaska where we have to take a seaplane or something to get there.
Now, both you and Viva like rescue animals. A lot of your environmental coverage was over animals, including orcas. I mean, I look at animals and I see tigers and wolves and I see like killer orcas. I just see the killer part. But where does your sort of love of animals come from?
I guess because my parents took me to a stable when I was young for a birthday party. When I was, I think, my 4th or 5th birthday party, they decided it would be fun to have at the local horseback riding stable. And I don't think they would have done that if they knew that I was going to then become, a competitive horseback rider. That is an expensive hobby if, you decide you want to pursue some of these higher level competitions. But I think probably that I was riding horses. And we always had dogs, but I was riding horses when I was very young. And that was actually I think also like a very informative part of my childhood, because it's also the reason why I know 0 movies. I like have 3 movies that I go to for every quote, but I don't know anything else because I was always at the barn. I was always taking care of my horse and hanging out with my friends. And there were 2 really, I think, big parts of that as far as like influencing my career as a journalist. And the first is that I didn't have time to kind of get into the social malaise of summers. And you're just, and people might say like, well, that's what kids are supposed to do. I'm like, well, I wasn't. I was always doing something with my horses. I was always with my friends at the barn. I got into a lot of trouble at the barn. Don't get me wrong. We'd always sneak into the doggy door of my trainer's house. And I used to call like all these 1-900 numbers and whatnot, just to like prank call them. And we'd charge up bills like $200, $300 in bills. But I was, I was with my buddies doing that kind of stuff. We just didn't, I had a lot of responsibility. I had a horse, and sometimes at one point I had 3 horses that I was taking care of. And so I think from a young age, it was like caring for something else and being responsible for something else. And I hope that our daughter has that too. We already have 2 horses, and that she's regularly participating in hobbies that are outdoors and caring for another life, not just yourself. But the other thing too is just by chance, I grew up riding at a barn that had a lot of diversity socioeconomically. And, there's a lot of people who grow up, they go to these really fancy show barns, and your parents are, really, really, really wealthy, and they're buying you horses that cost $25,000, $30,000. And mine was not that way. And my parents didn't know what they were doing, really. They just took me to this barn, and they're like me. They're not really like into all this showy stuff. And so I had a lot of friends who, like, the person who taught me how to drive a stick shift, her car didn't even have a floor. I was like the Flintstones. I could stick my feet through it. And I had friends that, I honestly, like I tell people, I grew up pretty privileged. My parents were doctors. I went to the same prep school from the time I was in kindergarten to senior year. And I credit that with like not becoming one of those people that was really into like driving a BMW and I think that this sort of the hospital thing that I described earlier was part of that, but also just having friends that were very different socioeconomically, and like they were my best friends. And so getting into the reporting world and post college and everything, those are the people that I liked hanging out with the most. I remember the lady who lived across the street from me in Knoxville. She worked at the dollar store, and she was like, became a really good friend of mine. I used to help watch her kids every once in a while when she was at work. And I used to go into my newsroom every day, like thinking of her. If I wasn't appealing to, say, my friend whose car didn't have the floor in it, or I wasn't understanding the woman who works at the dollar store who lived across the street from me, then I was pretty useless for my job. And so I think that was also very informative for how I got to where I am today too.
Just
now, what's your goal and objective now moving forward professionally?
Professionally?
Yeah.
Well, I think big picture, I'd like to be able to do YouTube stuff, or I don't want to say YouTube stuff because I'm trying to, get people to go to Locals. What is it again? Locals.AlisonMorrow.com, right? Locals comes first.
Yeah, it's AlisonMorrow.locals.com, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly.
But I'd like to be able to do this more and perhaps full time. I do have to do other work at this point. So I'd like to grow that so I can do more. But I'd like to transition. Right now I do a lot of media analysis, which I'm fine doing, but I would rather do less complaining about Chris Cuomo and more actual journalism. Like right now, I kind of see myself in the middle world. Like I approach the commentary I do with the same standards of ethics that I had when I was a journalist, but I don't see myself as doing sort of the high level journalism that I would like to do. So eventually that's what my goal would be to transition from just doing mostly media analysis to actually doing, real investigative journalism and then finally being able to do it with the time and the resources that I didn't have when I was in TV news.
So someone actually said, contact Tim Pool about joining the Tim Pool Reporter Media, whatever they call it. But he's looking to expand. But I mean, this is the thing, like to do it full time, and you have to, I mean, I don't know how you go about doing it. Investigative journalism when you're on your own, it's sort of like rogue journalism, and how you make a living doing it while walking the tightrope on YouTube. What I mean, have you been having problems with the monetization, with the, I won't say the algorithmic aspects, but the censorship, soft censorship in terms of demonetizing certain content, which deters potential coverage?
Yes, no, I've had that happen. I don't think that YouTube is long-term the place for somebody like me. I think I look at it now like a storefront window. It's for just window shoppers who you might grab their attention, but you don't want them to, like, that's not your store. You don't want them to shop there. You want to take them somewhere else where there's consistency and you're not going to just show up and somebody's going to put a lock on your door. So I don't think that Facebook or Twitter, or YouTube, Instagram, I don't think those are places where people like me are going to be able to, harness resources to do this full time, but they may be worthy showrooms. So I know people who have probably fewer subscribers, but are doing it full time because they've figured out how to go direct with their audience, who feels like they're getting very valuable information from them that they're not getting anywhere else. And YouTube, you have to have a very large audience with considerable amounts of views to generate revenue. Whereas there are other ways independently to have fewer people watching who are donating to your work, where you can actually make it work. So I think it's trying to walk that balance and figure out how to go direct with the people who are following you, the people who, that may be a smaller but mightier group that are interested. And I used to think when I got into the TV news business, which is why I think I wanted to work for a national show at the beginning, was that like bigger is better. I used to look at it that way, but I'm more and more convinced that the portion of a society that wakes up and pushes back is much smaller, and that it's okay. It's okay to have a smaller group of critically thinking, aware, interested, curious people I would rather have 5 of those than 100 zombies following me. So I'm trying to sort of, I guess, figure that business angle out.
Yeah, well, I call it quality over quantity. And it's
Mhm.
better. You look at any successful movement of any kind, political, cultural, social, economic, you name it. You look at what brings it about. It isn't all of a sudden a broad consensus of an idea. It's a small group of very committed, very informed people who are really interested in being self-educated and in the process being self-empowered. And that's why I think Locals is perfect for that. And that's where, because it has the video platforming capability, the audio podcast capability, the Facebook community message board capability, without the algorithmic manipulation, without the censorship capabilities, where the creator owns all their own content. And one of the reasons why Viva and I started doing it was to blaze a path for others to follow in it. Because I think I agree. I don't think big tech is not going to allow independent media to consistently compete with big media. They're just not going to let it happen. Well, I mean, when, people who couldn't qualify to ride the short bus to school are getting promoted like legal,
Right.
and then, it's not an ultimate answer. So I think going the Locals route, and I use YouTube as a platform to get people to those other places where where information is secure, but also where there's going to be constant access, and where you get to build a community. Like, I mean, what's great about what's happening on like our Locals page, vivabarneslaw.locals.com, is the information we're getting. I mean, increasingly, I don't even have to go to the range of sources I usually have to get making sure I'm staying on top of things, because I'll get it from our other board members. I mean, I got great feedback on the Floyd case. I'm going to crowdsource the Rittenhouse case in part using the Locals board. You may be able to crowdsource journalistic sources, journalistic information, potential stories through Locals, and I think that's a great path to pursue.
No, it is amazing, because you're crowdsourcing knowledge. The only issue becomes vetting what you might want to rely on as a source. Speaking of crowdsourcing knowledge, because Jenny Puckett raises a good point, going back to my comment and to correct it, COVID numbers is incorrect context for the CNN admitting propaganda. He admitting propaganda was building stories with zero evidence about Trump with the unspoken intent to get him out of office.
Jeff Zucker made that clear at CNN. So those are marching orders for everybody. Now, he was trying to impress someone who he thought was a lefty, because, there was an interesting article I read part of, which I shared on your Locals board, which was about the sort of mindset. It goes back into sort of the culture of journalism, but you're sort of tapping into it as a lifestyle as well. Because urban living is so disconnected from the world, from earth, from natural living things, from real existence, from survival. I mean, perceptions of gun control would be radically different if more people grew up in small towns or lived in small towns. They would understand what guns mean to those people. They're not playthings. It's not just for hunting. It's not just, like their old royalty, going out on a fox hunt. The ideas that urban people have about gun control is just inane. But as just one illustration, how much is the lifestyle shift empowering by itself for you?
Oh yeah, huge. But I mean, I think they both informed each other. I think it was that I already sort of was spending time in the country, and in even environmental reporting, if you're doing it well, you're obviously in rural America. You're talking to farmers, you're talking to hunters. You're not just talking to city-based conservation groups. And so I was spending a lot of time in rural America. In fact, I was on a panel not too long ago with another environmental reporter who worked for a radio station, and she's also, I don't know who did this first or who's following who, but she also has an Airstream, and they live in the middle of nowhere. And we both said we were asked to speak to this group of scientists at the University of Washington about journalism and science research and all that stuff. And she said the same thing I did, which is like, we're losing rural America because you guys are all living in the city. You're doing your science in the city. You're talking to reporters in the city, and it's no wonder that people think that what we're doing is, a bunch of bunk outside of these little urban areas. One of my friends after the election tweeted, there was some statistical analysis about how, all the cities, major cities basically went for Biden, and rural America in large part went for Trump. And I can't remember what it was. One of my old colleagues had tweeted that, and then another one retweeted it with some condescending comment. And so then I responded and said, what does this say about journalists then who are incentivized to move to bigger and bigger cities and bigger markets in their careers, leaving behind rural America in order to get their bigger salary and feel like they've made it in the business? And his response was, well, it would be that we've seen all of America. You know, we lived in the small towns when we started out, and now we live in the big cities. And I'm like, yeah, you live in the small town for a year, maybe 2 years at the beginning of your career. And then if you're moving the ladder, you've left the small town. I mean, this particular guy who said that is hilarious to me. He was in Eastern Washington, in not a small town, for 2 years. And then he was in Seattle at age like 25 or 26. So you can't tell me that that's, you know, spending a ton of time in rural America, especially if then now you're Seattle, now you're in another bigger market, even bigger than Seattle. And so, yeah, so reporters tend to be urbanites, especially if they're like higher up. And this is a good point to make, because the friends that I have who work in smaller markets that are in rural America, they do tend to think a little bit differently about, you know, here's an interesting editorial decision. I know a market that's, just call it like a mid-level market in the Midwest, and they're not letting their employees post COVID vaccine selfies. So that's like their policy, that you can't like virtue signal with your vaccine selfie. That's an interesting editorial decision, because I'm sure in Seattle that would be like all the rage. Everybody should be posting their vaccine selfie.
Well,
so
Brian Stelter was complaining that Fox News stars were not posting vaccine selfies.
Yeah,
and yeah, that brings us to on another discussion, which I tweeted about the other day, that I want to know who's getting paid to post whatever type of political post it is, because on YouTube, you know, you have to announce when it's a sponsored ad. When people are posting these selfies, celebrities, and they're getting paid for it but not disclosing it, and sometimes not even necessarily taking the actual vaccine, it raises questions. So I can understand the editorial decision is, you know, keep certain private decisions to oneself without it becoming a media issue.
Mm-hmm.
But
the whole Brian Stelter thing was ridiculous, by the way.
Everything about I want to say everything about Brian Stelter is ridiculous, but the incessant infatuation with Trump and Fox News on CNN and Stetler and Brian and reliable sources. If they didn't have Fox News, they would lose 50% of their coverage.
Right. Can I say something real fast? Hang on. Going back, because I wanted to bring this up. When you were talking about your definition of intention doesn't matter. So I just wanted to just throw this out there. Are you guys familiar with the term codependency?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay. So it's like, what's the difference if somebody sees themselves as a caretaker and you see them as codependent? See, this is the way I look at it. And I know, like,
syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, I guess the only reason I think that even matters is because now that can get you to a very harmful situation. I'm just saying that, like, a Stelter, I look at him and I disagree with that guy on everything. And I think the stuff that he's done recently is disgusting. That's why I've done a couple videos about him. I called him out for his speech suppression video. I called him out for that stuff about the vaccine selfies. I think it's insane what he's promoting. But I still even believe that guy is going home and, like, says to his wife, "Do you see how great I was today? You know, I'm helping the American public. I'm amazing." You know,
I think he goes home with a dead soul and only takes comfort in the $10 million he gets a year. I genuinely think he does not feel good about himself off air. And well,
that's possibly with him. I mean, nobody's going to listen to the guy ever again without hearing Mark Dice's imitation of him. But I agree. A lot of them probably think they're Bob Woodward. I mean, I think like I described the political class, one of the worst things that happened from a cultural influence perspective was the West Wing show, because it created all these little professional class Yaleys and Harvard types. And we saw what happens when the best and the brightest take over the national security apparatus in the 50s and 60s, and the moral horrors it visited upon the world. Then now we're letting them in journalism and law and medicine and science and profession after profession after profession. But part of, I think, the whole Bob Woodward, and it was because they think they're the righteous leaders, bringing down the evildoers and putting on the good cause of truth and justice, allows them to do things they couldn't do if they were cognizant or self-aware of their own biases.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what manufacturing consent really is all about, in part.
Yeah.
Johnson's point.
Yeah.
That you're much more effective censoring when you don't know you're being censored.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I say like that, to me, that's more dangerous. It's more dangerous to have that than to have a bunch of people who are self-aware and purposely intentionally lying. I think actually those people you could deal with much more easily than what we have right now, which is why I want to make sure your viewers understand I'm not trying to minimize this at all. I actually think it's a real crisis and a real problem. And then add on to that now you can go outside of your brand, whatever your 4 call letters are or whatever, and now you can grow your own little celebrity following like Jim Acosta has on Twitter. So you're already predisposed to being ignorant and arrogant, and now you have a whole new vehicle for your self-worship. It's a real problem. And the whole like White House press pass issue with Jim Acosta was a great example of that, because the fact that any journalist with any like half a brain thought that was a battle over the freedom of the press is like totally, I don't even understand. I can't even understand the level, I guess, of just lack of self-awareness or ignorance over that topic. For me, a press conference is theater. It's something that you do because it's part of your job, but in no way, shape, or form does an actual investigative journalist, somebody who's been doing that work, think that you're ever getting anything worth it in a press conference. For the most part, it's set up by the politician or whoever's having them to tell you whatever they want you to hear, and you're just taking it. You can ask them questions, but they're going to still tell you whatever they want. The real journalism happens behind the scenes. It happens with sourcing. It happens at night when nobody else is in the newsroom and you're on the phone with somebody that is too scared to come in and talk to you. I mean, it happens with FOIAs and documents that you're pouring through night after night. I've worked on those investigations. So press conferences, they're kind of a joke. And so when like he lost his press pass and now everybody's riled up saying that this is the end of journalism, like, to me, that was like, okay, if that's really what we all think journalism is, then it's over, And so it's just to say that like, it's so warped and so distorted. But again, they think that is the crusade. They believe that like they don't believe they're codependent. They believe they're the caretakers of America.
Alison, we have a thing on the channel called Confession Through Projection. So I am very much aware of it. So when I accuse Stetler of going home, being miserable, but bashing his money, someone says, Viva, are you confessing to self-loathing or making 10 million a year? Here's my hashtag Confession Through Projection part of this. I project honesty, intellectual honesty behind the deceit. So I assume that Acosta, above and beyond the bravado and the acting before the before the media, is honest enough to know that what he's doling out is crap. So I'm projecting what I think is the underlying honesty behind the deceit, but maybe I'm projecting that too much as it is. But it's an interesting point also, Alison, is for people who are saying you're giving the benefit of the doubt to the media because you're on the media side, because you're ex-media or you are media with a different life now. Your argument is going to be no. What I'm saying is even worse, is that they truly believe the nonsense that they're spewing out, the goodness in their deceit, and which makes them even more dangerous than an outright liar.
Yeah, because you can't argue facts with a person like that. That's the real problem. You can't argue facts with a person like that because they believe that just by virtue of you're even arguing, you are morally inferior. See, that's the real problem. It's like with a person who is just distorting facts, but it knows it and doesn't see themselves as morally superior, that person you could actually, I believe, have a debate with. But the person who won't even listen to you, won't even discuss with you because they believe the very act of discussion is leaching into moral inferiority for them, then there's no way to even work with that. That's why it's so problematic, because they're just going to keep walking around in their ignorance like zombies, thinking that they are the messiah gatekeepers of democracy, when in fact, they are propagandists. They are pushing seriously problematic narratives, but you can't argue with somebody who thinks that they're doing that to save the world. They just won't even listen to you.
Now you and Eric Hunley do the News with Booze. How did you meet up with Eric?
Eric wrote me to have on his channel. And so, I did one live stream with him. And then after that, I think we just stayed in touch because it's nice having somebody to commiserate with about all the problems on YouTube. And I don't even know how the whole News with Booze thing, I think I was just calling him one time. We were just talking about like how to grow your channel and what are you working on? And he was like, well, what if we did, actually, I think you guys were part of the inspiration because he was like, Viva and Barnes do this thing. Like we could do a weekly thing. And then I think we just naturally are drinking drinkers, maybe. I'm not sure how the alcohol entered into the picture, but I think our original like motto for it was because we can't take it straight, like news with booze because we can't take it straight. And it was just like, whatever, let's just drink ourselves into a stupor because the news is so terrible these days.
Now, what is your definition of good wine? Like what are some examples? You were mentioning earlier the Emmy-Award show, poor wine. But what are some of your favorite wines? Put it that way.
Well, okay. My favorite wines are the ones that are grown. This is so snobby, but it's the ones I had a doctor I used to interview when my channel used to be like off-grid living type stuff, which I'm launching a second channel to do that, and that'll probably survive long past my, my media analysis channel. But, he was really into and kind of got me on the path of wines that are grown at very high altitude in Argentina because of the health benefits of like the skins that, the whatever they're called, that the skins produce, I guess, to protect the grape from the harshness of the sun. And so they're working hard with these phytochemicals that are in the wine. And then they also use a lot fewer pesticides because there just aren't as many bugs. So I love Malbecs, and I like Argentinian Malbecs that are grown at very high altitude. Is that specific enough?
Yeah. So is it for that? Is it because of the taste, or is it for that environmental related reason?
Yeah, I like really robust wines, and I think they tend to be. I'm not really a fan of Pinot Noir. Plus, Pinots give me a headache. I'm not really sure like what that is, but maybe it's because I can drink more of them because they're just a lighter wine. So yeah, I like it. Same way I like IPAs. I'm really into, or dark stouts. I like beers that come with a punch. My husband, every once in a while, he'll like go through the Miller Lite phase. And I just don't understand how people drink light beer or really like anything that looks the same color as when it comes out. That's what I always say. I will not drink that. So I like robust wine and beer, and typically tend to do like, I'm Irish, well, half Norwegian, half Irish. And I think the Irish in me likes the whole sort of, soda bread with dark beer kind of experience, or if it's wine, just a more robust, drier wine.
Now your husband's an ex-Marine. How does the environmental journalist in Seattle hook up and marry the Marine who was born right near you in Pittsburgh?
I was sent to Florida to cover an organization that he was doing training for, and we met. It's kind of funny, actually. I'm not sure how deep we want to get into this story, but at the time, I was actually seeing someone else. But we were like on and off again. And at this point we were off. But it was always an on and off again thing. Anyway, my boss sends me to Florida, and it's this organization that he does work for, which is Veterans Empowered to Protect African Wildlife, VetPaw. They take former, usually post 9/11 veterans, and send them to South Africa, and they do work training and protecting endangered species, elephants and rhinos typically. And so Lynn was doing some training for them, and I was sent to do the story about VetPaw because we had one of the members had an affiliation with Washington. And I remember calling a friend of mine because she's like, you're hanging out with because it was just this terrible relationship I was in. And she was like, you were hanging out with all these really interesting veterans. Can't you find a new guy? And I was like, no, I'm done with men. And then I met Lynn, and the rest is history, I guess. I mean, we were friends for a long time before. There's much more to the story, probably not for you two, but we were friends for a while before we ever ended up starting to date. And then he was living in Florida, I was living in Seattle. So we had to figure that part out. But here we are. We were engaged 6 months after we started dating, and then I think we've been married almost 4 years now.
A boy named Lynn. So
yeah.
What I was going to say, I had a question. Oh, so I brought up a couple of chats because people have some practical questions. I may not be able to do it again. One says, my concern here is that we are talking about what's wrong and the obvious concerns, but what are we doing? What we're not talking about is what we're going to do. What action plans are we making? Another person said, they lost faith with Lester Holt. Maybe it wasn't Lester Holt. I forget who.
Yeah, it was Lester Holt.
What are you doing, Alison? I guess I think we know, but what are you doing now to try to reestablish confidence in the media, or is it irreparably ruptured?
Or maybe another way of journalism, just old school journalism that may be outside of the traditional media matrix.
Right. I think it's right now it's trying to hold a standard for information gathering on my own channel that, I want to be an example for others, but also to pave the way for people who might be nervous and unsure about going out on their own and talking about some of this stuff. I think one of the reasons why I like having people who are a little controversial on my channel, whether or not I agree with them, is because I want to normalize ideas that right now mainstream media writes off as any number of things, all the ists, all the obias, all the conspiracy theories. And they're able to do that because if they can still look at independent journalists and say, yeah, but they're not in our group. You know, they can just say whatever they want. You know, we have standards. That's typically the way that they look at it. But they can't say that about me. I come from their, you know, I'm one of them. I come from their world. I have their door prizes. I was allowed into their editorial meetings. They trusted me to do my job. And so with somebody like me, you have to start contending with the ideas. You can't just write off the person's character. In fact, you know, I was a leader in my newsroom and I was looked up to by most of, you know, my peers and my managers. And so one of the I think most important things that I'm trying to do is to say, like, okay, you might be able to write all those other people off, but you can't write me off. You can't write off that I'm just like one of those fringe people, because otherwise you're going to have to then contend with the fact that you trusted me for all those years to do the work that you trusted me to do. And either you were the insane person that was allowing me to run amok in your newsroom, or maybe there's something going on here. And so I'm hoping to use my channel to sort of bridge that, so that I'm not saying they're probably the vast majority of the people that are going to be snobby and look down on, you know, just like we see over and over again in coverage nowadays on whatever idea it is that they find to be reprehensible. I'm not really sure those people are paying attention, and they're probably not going to care. But the people who are kind of in the middle, who are sort of like, okay, what is she doing? What's going on? And they're sitting in the editorial meetings. I'm hoping that I'm going to give them the opportunity to say, yeah, but Alison had this person, or like, see this. So in other words, like, maybe it's not me, but it's the ideas that enter onto my channel that if I can even go, if I'm having any influence on mainstream news, I think that's the influence that I would be the people who are starting to wake up and haven't left. So they're not necessarily doing the decentralized, you know, reporting thing, are saying like, okay, maybe these people aren't quacks like everybody else in my newsroom are saying. Maybe there's something to be discerned from this, because I saw Alison talking to this person, and she's not a fringe person. Like she comes from our background. There's got to be something else going on. And then for everybody else, it's just to give, if they do want to leave, it's to sort of pave the way for those people that are like, okay, you know, I can do it because somebody else went before me.
Alison, I don't want to jinx anything or give anybody any bad ideas, but if you're not a fringe person, they can make you a fringe person, so that call you a fringe person, so they don't have to discuss with the fringe person or fraternize with the fringe person.
That's true.
I never, but for God's sake, I never consider myself to be right of anything. Nor did I consider myself to be a fringe person. And the journey, you know, started humorously, noting that sometimes videos would get randomly demonetized, and then, you know, lo and behold, I associate with Robert. I fraternize with Robert, and I go to Twitter and see what people call me because I associate with Robert. And then you see how people call you names because of who you have on your channel, because of who won't go on your channel, because for these very same reasons. It's all an ecosystem. It's a fabricated ecosystem. The only thing I think you can hope for, and we can all hope for, is that enough people get fed up, because enough people find out that at some point in time they're going to come for you too. And so, you know, with the Great Awakening, hopefully will happen where people will walk away.
Well, and at least my experience that I think being a red pill for people that are still in the blue pill world is valuable. So I think people with Alison's background, it's the old, you know, knock and it shall be answered. It's you're not looking for the people who aren't interested in knocking. You're interested in the people who are interested in knocking, and because you're a different gateway, you're not Alex Jones, you're not someone else they can easily caricature. That for those conscientious people, I mean, like I took a different view of the Zimmerman case once I saw the lawyer that was involved in defending him. And then I was like, hold on a second. I mean, I know his politics. I know his background. He's saying the case is totally bogus. He's saying the case he was going way beyond what a defense lawyer would have to do. And then I tuned in and realized, oh man, all the facts that have been told me by the media are wrong, and led me down a whole path. So I think there's great utility to it. Now, you mentioned 3 movies that you referenced. What are those 3 movies?
Oh, God. Okay, well, Princess Bride, Robin Hood Men in Tights, and I love Clueless. I'll be honest with you. I can probably, I can quote a lot of Alicia Silverstone. Whenever I teach, I usually use a lot of quotes from her debate, where, I don't know, do you guys know Clueless? Have you watched it?
Oh, yes.
Recently, and I was shocked by the plot that I never fully appreciated as a kid. An underage girl having an anonymous relationship with her older stepbrother. I mean,
yeah, that's actually, you're right. It is. It wouldn't work in today's world. I'm not really sure why I like Clueless so much, other than I think her character is hilarious. But she has that debate scene where she's like, if we just get to the kitchen, rearrange things a little, then we can certainly party with the Haitians. And I use that when I teach media stuff a lot, because the movie, well, as you brought up, there's just there's a lot of just weirdness to it. But Alicia Silverstone, in like her own very weird, stupid way, actually makes some good points in the movie. And so I tell journalism students, like, don't always look at the outside. You have to try to listen to what somebody is saying, and not just look at the way, like, they're wearing a very short Catholic schoolgirl dress and they're dating their stepbrother and driving through four-way stops.
I was watching with my kids, like, how did I not find this questionable at the time? And maybe it's a question of being traumatized by experience. I look at everything coming out of Hollywood, and I look for that angle now of moral degeneracy and another Ilya concept. I look at that. So now whenever I look back at movies, and you look back at Shirley Temple movies, and you look back at Lolita, and you look back at Taxi Driver, and I look back at The Professional, maybe I'm looking through blinders, or maybe it's been there the whole time, and I just finally got a red pilled enough to see what degeneracy comes out of Hollywood. But that's my rant.
Yeah, it's bad.
We have 3 eternal truths. First one is that Sally Yates is still corrupt. Right. The second is that Epstein didn't kill himself. But the third is for each person to uncover and discover on their own. What would be your third eternal truth?
Oh my gosh, you asked me this once before. I should have remembered my answer. Well, can I ask you real fast before we get to the third eternal truth? What happened with Bernie Madoff? Did he kill himself? Do we know?
I don't. I just know he's dead.
We don't know anything about his death, though.
I'd be surprised if he whacked himself. His ego was always too big. Now, there were some people he defrauded. Years ago, I had a case where I recovered some money for some people in the Caribbean. And then years later, I had this like voodoo reputation. Whenever I went down there, these people would be really generous and open, and I'd recover money in any circumstance. And found out later it was because the people that I had recovered money from the first time ended up dead a week later. And they attributed that to me. I had nothing to do with it, but they'd been stealing from the Russian mob. So, and then some people thought I had them whacked. But it didn't hurt for the reputation. But, if there was rumors of that with Madoff, it wasn't Madoff directly. It was some of the feeder funds. Was it they ripped off the Russian mob? That's why some of those people ended up in the Hudson River. So it could be some of those people caught up to old Bernie. So that wouldn't surprise me if that was the case.
82 years old. Come on, I mean, he's lucky. He's lucky. I'm sorry to remember. He was lucky to have lived to 82.
That's true. It could just be natural causes, but it wouldn't shock me if those people tend to always pay. There's certain people you don't scam. Just FYI.
I heard he had kidney disease, but it also did seem to come out of nowhere. Like we didn't have any lead up to this, so that's why it seems a little odd to me.
Maybe there's a Hunter Biden connection. Just throwing it out there for fun.
Maybe.
I have no reason to believe that whatsoever. And personally, people should watch the behavior panel. They did a Hunter Biden review.
Oh my God!
I thought they were going to stay away from politics. They had the guts to step up and do a Hunter Biden review. That's going to be interesting. Maybe that's the third eternal truth. Might have a Biden name somewhere in there.
What was the second eternal truth again?
Epstein didn't kill himself. The other one is Sally Yates is still corrupt.
Alison, so look, it might be a good time to wind it up, but let's save some discussion for another day.
And I think News with Booze, you guys are going to be up in a few minutes. Right, Alison?
You're going live with Eric right after this, Alison.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to take a bathroom break. I don't know how you guys do this multiple times a week. This is a lot.
I have a hyperactive bladder. I wake up every 2 hours every night, regardless.
I do too.
I said I inherited my mother's bladder, except my mother's bladder got damaged by me coming out as the 5th child. But I have whatever. But I sit through Streets with Robert. We go over 2 hours. I don't get up to pee. It's an amazing thing.
I know I that is amazing, but I'm glad to know I'm not the only person who does that, because I'm at like usually I give 3 to 4 times a night.
Me every night.
That's my eternal truth.
I think the third eternal truth might be there is no truth. Oh, then what do we make of the first two? Okay, bada bing, bada boom. Alison, thank you very much. Your channel, by the way, let everyone know where they can find you. I'm going to put it in the links of the pinned comment regardless, but let everybody know.
YouTube is just Alison Morrow, youtube.com/Alison Morrow. And then locals, right? AlisonMorrow.locals.com. And I'm on Odyssey now too. I'll also be on Rockfin by next week, but locals is the place I'm probably the most engaged with people. So yeah, definitely head over to locals.
Awesome. And Robert, incidentally, we didn't get into it, Robert. We're going to talk about it Sunday, but the news about the media reporting on the two police incidents, Ashley and
the other one near Minneapolis.
Yeah, no, we're going to talk about this Sunday. And
there's word to the wise. Don't invent. What's amazing is this another story the journalists just don't want to cover. It seems like it's barely out there. It turns out there's a taser company selling tasers to police departments that police departments are willingly buying that look and feel exactly like a gun. When the whole point is to have the taser be a different color, different shape, different feel. That's the real culprit here, frankly. That's as much the culprit as anybody. It's still it's completely bad by the cop, but they don't want to talk about that because that's institutional. That's corporate liability, that's city liability, that's Democratic politicians that have been buying them all across the place, that's contractors, that's vendors, that's lobbyists. Instead, they're going to blame a cop on the street who just hit a panic button and made a mistake for a guy who was who had a legitimate warrant for committing violent crimes.
So my husband and I were talking about this, and he was telling me about how when they were training in the military using firearms, that a lot of times you were not, I don't even know what the right term is, but say it gets stuck, like your gun gets stuck. You are not allowed to troubleshoot your firearm on the range because people do dumb things when they're right. So you have to either raise your hand or raise your foot. And then your training officer comes over and they fix your gun for you and then give it back to you. But the problem was then they would go to war and something would happen with their guns. And the immediate reaction was they would stick their hand up instead of fix their gun. And it was like a training thing because they had just gotten into such a repetitive, just used to, this is what my gear is. And when I have a problem with my gear, this is what I do. And then they're filled with all kinds of, catecholamines and whatever, because they're under high stress, and they just revert back to whatever it is that they're used to, or what they're used to either feeling like in what you're talking about in your case, or whatever they're used to doing. They're just raising their hands. Like, that's not helpful, but really the whole training thing needs to be addressed. And it isn't often when you're hearing about the defund movement and whatnot, like, what are you going to do? They don't have enough money already. And then they lose more money, and they're not leaving the leftovers for the training. I can assure you, my husband trains police officers, and and when they get defunded, they're not like, well, now that we have a little bit left, let's put it towards training. That's not typically what happens.
That'd be another good interview with Lynn, would be that.
Yeah.
The Suez Canal one was also very interesting. Better
be careful though, Robert, because he will outtalk you. I'm
not. Yeah. No, I'll let you talk. Someone mentioned I should not have said ex-Marine. It's retired Marine. I'm always correct with the Marines.
Former Marine.
That's it. Former Marine. Those are some intense gentlemen.
And now I'm just publishing a video today covering the news on these two incidents. But now I said, as new facts emerge, opinions might change. You see people in the chat saying, different position for the different weapons, but I have seen taser pistols that look identical. It didn't even occur to me. Not that it's going to change much because, it might still be negligence, but Robert, we'll talk about it Sunday as to whether or not there can be, when she gets sued civilly, calling in warranty of the taser or of the department itself. But still, it's just a tragic. I mean, we'll talk about it Sunday, Robert. But Alison, thank you very much. We do this again for sure. Enjoy the news with booze with Eric. I'll be watching, but I will not be joining in tonight. I hear some dogs that need to be walked. Robert, I'll see you Sunday. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Another wonderful live stream. And Robert, who do we have next Wednesday?
Oh, I can't announce it yet because it's almost confirmed. But yes, it'll be a great fun interview as well. But got to wait for him to give the final confirmation.
Okay, awesome. Alison, thank you again very much. Everybody, enjoy the evening. And Alison, Robert, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. Everyone.